Have you ever found yourself, or maybe even, a whole company, stuck doing things a certain way? Not because it's actually the best way, but just, well, because that's how it's always been done. And what if that same pattern, that same kind of inertia, dictates some of your deepest beliefs?
That's a powerful thought.
Path dependence. These invisible forces shaping our world, our organizations, even our minds. And we'll explore a really interesting conversational tool called Street Epistemology that might just help us break free. And before we really get into it, a huge thank you to Gary Pica for the podcast concept itself.
Absolutely. And to Gemini 2.5 Flash for the fantastic research that went into this.
And also Notebook LM for the great voiceover and for, helping stitch this whole deep dive together.
Okay, so let's start with path dependence. Where does this idea even come from?
Well, it's a concept from the social sciences mostly. And it basically boils down to this idea that history matters a lot.
Right. So past events, past decisions, they don't just disappear. They actually constrain or heavily influence the choices we have later on.
So the path you've already walked kind of dictates where you can go next.
Precisely. The future development of, well, anything, technology, institutions, even how we think, it's shaped by the path that's already taken.
Which means you can end up with outcomes that are really, really hard to change, almost like being logged in.
Yeah, difficult to alter or even reverse. And what's really fascinating, kind of counterintuitive maybe, is that small, sometimes totally random events early on, they can have these massive, significant, and lasting effects on where things end up. Like a tiny nudge sending a ball down a completely different track on a pinball machine.
Okay, that makes sense. It sounds almost like inevitable sometimes. Do we have some real-world examples of this? Where some old, maybe arbitrary decision still shapes things today?
Oh, absolutely. There are some classics. One of the most mind-boggling ones is the standard railway track gauge.
The width between the rails.
Exactly. Around the world, most tracks are precisely 4 feet, 8.5 inches wide. That's about 1.44 meters.
4 feet, 8.5 inches. That is oddly specific. That doesn't sound like an engineer sat down and calculated the perfect width for trains.
You are absolutely spot on. It wasn't chosen for optimal engineering. Believe it or not, it traces all the way back to the width needed for the wheels on carriages pulled by 2 horses.
You're kidding. Horses?
Not kidding. An engineer back in the 1820s, George Stephenson, was building the first big public railway, the Liverpool and Manchester line. He just used the width that was already common for coal mine tramways, which were based on carts pulled by horses. So he used that gauge, it got copied across Britain, then Europe, North America, and boom, global standard.
So our modern high-speed trains are running on a track width ultimately determined by basically a horse's backside. That's wild. History really does matter.
It's a perfect example. A seemingly insignificant detail locks in a global standard with massive long-term consequences. Even later, when people realized wider tracks might be better, faster.
Too late. The cost to change everything was just too much.
Exactly. The path was set. The inertia was immense.
Okay, wow. And speaking of things we use every day that feel kind of arbitrary, the QWERTY keyboard. I've heard that story too, that it wasn't about speed.
Another classic, yes, QWERTY, designed back in the 1870s for those very early mechanical typewriters.
Right, the ones with the actual levers swinging up.
And the layout wasn't about typing efficiency at all. It was specifically designed to slow typists down.
Slow them down, why?
To prevent those mechanical arms, the type bars, from clashing and jamming if you typed common letter pairs too quickly. So they put frequently used letters far apart.
So we are still using a keyboard layout that was literally designed to be inefficient, just because those old machines would jam. My fingers definitely feel like they're doing gymnastics sometimes.
It really drives home how sticky these paths can be, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Even though we have alternatives, like the Dvorak layout, which is designed for speed.
QWERTY just hangs on.
Path dependence. You've got all the existing keyboards, the training, the muscle memory. The cost and hassle of switching are just seen as too high.
And it's not just tech, right? You mentioned infrastructure, too.
Yeah, absolutely. Think about city roads. Sometimes modern highway systems, like, say, parts of Chicago's, they actually follow the lines of much older paths. Maybe Native American trails from centuries ago.
So even with cars and concrete, we end up funneling into the same old bottlenecks.
Sometimes, yeah. The initial path, even when that old, can still dictate the layout and cause the same choke points 100 years later.
Horses, typewriters, ancient trails, we just keep following the lines. That's quite a powerful concept. And this must apply to organizations too, right? Businesses.
Oh, definitely. Businesses are incredibly prone to path dependence. They can get locked into ways of doing things, practices that aren't really relevant anymore, or maybe aren't efficient.
And that must really stifle innovation, right? If you're just stuck on the old path.
Hugely. It makes disruptive innovation really, really hard. Breaking out of those established patterns, even when you know they're not working well, can be incredibly difficult from the inside.
Is there a good example of a company that got caught in this kind of corporate inertia?
There's a really telling case study, Camera Corp,
Hmm.
a German camera maker, 150 years old, hugely successful through the 20th century.
Okay, classic German engineering precision.
Exactly. Their whole identity was built on optical excellence, mechanical accuracy. That was their path. But then, in the mid-90s, things started to shift.
Electronics entering the picture.
Right. The head of electronics suggested adding new electrical features into the lenses, things like autofocus motors.
Sounds like a smart move, adapting to the times.
You'd think so. But he hit a massive wall of internal resistance. Employees, engineers, managers, they argued these features weren't optical, they weren't mechanical, therefore they weren't Camera Corp.
Wow. So their own success, their own specialization became a trap?
Precisely. They defined themselves so narrowly, the company became, as the source puts it, tapered in its appeal. They catered only to this shrinking niche of traditional camera purists.
And then the digital wave hit.
And it hit hard in the late 90s. To their credit, Camera Corp saw the threat. They even set up a separate digital imaging group. And that group actually made some pretty significant breakthroughs in digital tech.
So they had the technology internally.
They did. But the rest of the organization, the dominant culture, steeped in that optical mechanical path. They just couldn't fully embrace it. The organizational inertia was too strong.
So the breakthroughs just sat there.
Pretty much sidelined. It actually took an external investor coming in, someone from the outside, to champion those digital parts of the company, force a reset of the old processes, and basically dismantle the usual paths.
That's incredible. It shows just how hard it is to break free from the inside once that path is deeply grooved.
It really does. Subscribing is the only way to keep the cows from learning TikTok dances.
Oh,
Oh my God.
the stakes have been raised.
I know, it's like we have to save the world
Yeah, we have to protect the internet.
from dancing cows. And that brings us to this idea of knowledge stickiness.
Knowledge stickiness, like ideas get stuck too.
Exactly. Even in places like R&D departments, organizations tend to rely heavily on the knowledge they already have, rather than actively seeking out or embracing new knowledge, especially if it challenges the existing way.
And that's not just big companies, is it? That sounds like something that could apply to us individually, our own thinking.
This is where it gets really personal, I think. If entire industries, massive technologies can get stuck in these old patterns, how much more vulnerable are our own individual beliefs, our thought processes, to that same kind of path dependence?
Yeah, that's a bit unsettling. Especially now, right? With information overload, misinformation everywhere, we need to be able to think critically about why we believe what we believe.
It's crucial. Our upbringing, our first exposures to ideas, our past experiences, they all carve out these mental pathways. And sometimes deviating from them feels, well, almost impossible. They become our own sticky knowledge.
Our cognitive ruts. So we're stuck with QWERTY brains sometimes, believing things just because that's the path we started on.
It's a real possibility, a cognitive blind spot we might not even be aware of.
Okay, so how do we get unstuck? Especially with those really deeply held beliefs, the ones tied to our identity. Is there a way to, check our own mental wiring?
Well, this is where street epistemology comes in. It's offered as a potential tool for this.
Street epistemology. Okay, what is that exactly?
It's basically a conversational method. It's designed to help people, including ourselves, reflect on the quality of their reasons for holding a belief, and, crucially, the reliability of the methods they used to arrive at that confidence.
Okay, so quality of reasons, reliability of methods. It's not about arguing fact.
Definitely not. That's key. It is not about debating. It's not about winning. It's not about proving someone wrong. Doing that often backfires anyway, makes people dig in their heels even more.
Right, the backfire effect. Okay, so if it's not debating, what is it?
Your journey to deeper understanding starts here. NavigatingBeliefs.com. Sign up. It's free.
So it's not just learning, it's an adventure.
Yeah, like a quest for knowledge. It's about fostering critical thinking through, ideally, a respectful, collaborative dialogue. It uses Socratic methods,
Yeah,
asking questions.
like Socrates did, yeah. leading people to examine their own assumptions.
Exactly. But applying it specifically to explore how we know what we claim to know, not just what we know. The focus is always on improving the reliability of the methods we use to form beliefs for everyone involved in the conversation.
Improving our mental toolkit, basically, not just swapping out one belief for another. And there's this term, doxastic openness.
Right, that's the ideal mindset. Doxastic openness just means being willing to revise your beliefs if you encounter good evidence. Being open to change.
Okay, but how do you even start that? If someone's really certain about something, asking them to question it could feel like an attack, couldn't it?
Absolutely. That's why the process is really important. It has to start with building rapport. Real, genuine rapport. Creating a safe, respectful space is step one. If someone feels judged or attacked, it's over before it starts. Trust is crucial.
Makes sense. You need that foundation before you can explore anything sensitive. So rapport first, then what?
Then you work together to identify one specific claim, one belief to talk about. Keep it focused.
Okay.
After that, you gently gauge their confidence. You might ask something like, on a scale from 0 to 100, how confident are you that that belief is true?
Ah, the scale question. I can see how that makes it less about true or false and more about the degree of certainty. Kind of makes it more objective, maybe.
Exactly. It gets the person thinking about their own confidence level, makes it explicit, and gives you both a starting point.
Okay, confidence level established. What's next? This is where you challenge the path dependence, right?
This is the core of it, yeah. Exploring the reasons, but not just what the reasons are, but how they originally concluded the belief was true. This is sometimes called eliciting epistemology.
Eliciting epistemology. Okay. How does that work in practice?
So let's say someone believes, I don't know, that climate change is happening only because they've noticed hotter summers personally.
Okay. The belief itself might be true.
Right, the belief aligns with scientific consensus. But the method they use to arrive at that confidence, relying solely on limited personal experience for a huge, complex, global issue, that method might be unreliable on its own. Street epistemology allows you to explore the quality of that justification, the how, without directly attacking the what.
I see. So it's like checking the foundations of the belief, not just arguing about the building itself. You keep asking gently, what gives you confidence that X is true, until you get to the bedrock reason.
That's a great analogy. It's a foundation inspection.
Yeah.
You keep exploring until you reach what they see as the fundamental justification. That really gets at the root of those cognitive paths we talked about.
And then you use the Socratic method to examine that foundation.
Exactly. You guide the person using questions to apply their own reasoning and knowledge to see if maybe there are inconsistencies or weaknesses in how they arrived at their conclusion. It's much more effective than just telling them they're wrong.
Because they're discovering it themselves, sort of?
Precisely. And always, always, the focus stays on the reliability of the method of knowing, not on whether the ultimate belief is true or false.
And language matters here too, right? You mentioned using neutral language.
Hugely important. For example, talking about the belief rather than your belief. It creates a little distance, separates the person's identity from the idea, making it feel safer to examine.
Less personal, less threatening.
Exactly. And definitely avoid loaded terms. Calling something a conspiracy theory, even if you think it is, just shuts down the conversation immediately.
Okay. What about testing how strong the belief is? How open someone actually is to changing their mind?
That's where the feasibility tests come in. You might ask something like, is there any potential evidence that could change your confidence level in this claim?
Change, not lower.
Right. Using change is key. It's neutral. It allows for the possibility that evidence could increase their confidence too. It feels less confrontational than asking what would make them doubt it. It tests the belief's resilience, how open that doxastic system really is.
That's clever. So what's the biggest no-no then? The absolute thing to avoid?
Arguing, debating, trying to win. It just doesn't work for this goal. It triggers defensiveness, leads to that backfire effect, and people often end up more certain, not less.
Okay, no debating. What else? What about personal stories? People often base beliefs on experiences.
Right. You never want to dismiss or denigrate someone's personal experience. That's invalidating. Instead, the focus is on questioning the process of reasoning from that experience to the conclusion, especially if the conclusion is something untestable, like a supernatural cause. How did they get from event A to conclusion B? What was the method?
Got it. Respect the experience, question the inferential leap. So what does success actually look like then, if it's not about changing someone's mind on the spot?
Success is often subtle. sometimes called achieving a spider moment.
A spider moment? What's that?
It's that moment of slight puzzlement, a flicker of doubt, when the person talking realizes, maybe just for a second, that they don't quite know what they thought they knew, or that their reasons aren't quite as solid as they assumed.
Oh, like a little mental itch, a tiny crack in the certainty. That sounds really gentle, actually.
It is that moment of doubt, that little seed planted that's the success. It might disrupt those old, ingrained mental paths later on, leading to more reflection. The goal isn't conversion. It's sowing, as one source puts it, seeds of doubt that will blossom into ever-expanding moments of doxastic openness.
So it's about starting a process, not finishing one, creating the potential for change down the line.
Exactly. The real insight here, maybe, is that uncertainty isn't failure. It's actually the starting point for real learning. It's maybe the only way to step off those predetermined paths.
Wow. Okay, so let's wrap this up. Understanding path dependence helps us see how things get stuck. Technologies, companies, even our own thinking, just because of history, because that's how it's always been.
Right. Gives us a framework for seeing those invisible constraints.
And street epistemology then offers this, well, gentle collaborative method. Not to argue, but to respectfully explore the foundations of our beliefs, the how behind the what, potentially helping us nudge ourselves or others onto slightly different, maybe more reliable paths.
Yeah, it's about building a better way to think about our thinking, essentially, to examine those justifications we often take for granted. The power lies in questioning the how, not just asserting the what.
So maybe a final thought for you listening right now. What's a deeply held belief you have that might, just might, be a product of path dependence? Something you believe mainly because it's the path you've always been on.
And how might exploring its foundations, maybe using some of these ideas, change your path forward? Something to chew on.
Definitely. Okay, before we go, final thanks again to Gary Pica for the podcast concept.
And to Gemini 2.5 Flash for pulling together the research.
And huge thanks to Notebook LM for the great voiceover and for helping put this deep dive all together.
Keep exploring, everyone. Keep questioning.
We'll catch you on the next one.